Now, there's no one better to help us look into Adobe's future than Robert Breza of RBC Capital Markets. He's a Bloomberg best, one of the most accurate analysts covering the technology sector. He joins us now from Minneapolis. So first of all, what is your reaction to the numbers today and the stock going sideways?
Well, I think the overall numbers are a little bit of a mixed bag. When you look at it, they did beat the revenues and the earnings. But when you look at the geographic splits, the Japan market clearly outperformed, but North America was weaker than what we had expected, as well as Europe. So when we look at the guidance going forward, we actually see a little bit more risk still into those numbers. Specifically, when you look at North America, it's their largest market. And when you back out some of the acquisitions, such as Day Software out of the European market, you really get a growth rate that's probably closer to 5 or 6%. And that's going to hamper the company's multiple here as they transition to more of a upfront perpetual-based model to a subscription model. And that's going to affect the company going forward.
So, Robert, what is your take on this whole Flash dispute? Is Adobe relying too heavily on this technology?
Well, I think Flash really does play a critical part, especially when we look at all the plethora of devices that are out there. You really want to use Flash, and as you noted, Creative Suite is the #1 product that generates all the revenues at Adobe, and that ties very tightly into Flash. I think the future of them developing more HTML5 standards, which Adobe sits on the board, will actually allow them to help kind of supplement some of the issues as they relate and kind of go up against Apple. So there is a workaround solution. They'll continue to have to monetize that workaround solution to kind of move forward.
Yet Adobe continues to release Flash and Flash developing products. Why is that?
Well, it is probably outside of just the iPhone and iPad. It is the most often used platform on Android and other smart devices. So when we look at the market share gains that Android is making, it's important that they continue to innovate and use Flash, but they also have to really work towards the HTML5 standards as well.
All right, Robert, I want to bring in Cory Johnson, our editor-at-large, who's been covering Adobe for many years. Cory, your thoughts?
Yeah, Robert, when you look at Creative Suite 5.5, the company took a risk there by coming out with an incremental update. What were the numbers like for CS 5.5?
Well, CS5 was up about 30 million above our estimate, which is mostly driven by the Japanese market. I think as we look at the interim release of 5.5, it's important to think CS6 will actually come out next year, and then they're going to go towards a more annual release. So we really won't even know what the impact of the next Creative Suite release is until 2013. We've actually never seen a software company be able to make a successful transition from an upfront perpetual model to a subscription-based model, which is what Adobe's really trying to do to attract that new incremental customer. And that's a very difficult transition.
Wait a minute. Does this mean this is really the last hurrah, that CS 5.5 is their last chance to just sell software and they're transitioning to something that you've never seen work before? This is it?
Well, Creative Suite moving from a perpetual-based upfront model to a subscription model, that's very difficult for the company to predict on how many customers will actually move to subscriptions versus perpetual upfront sales. So that model is very difficult in Wall Street's eyes to make from a risking perspective. So that's the difficult. Not that the products won't work, it's just difficult to predict what the revenue stream is going to look like.
Is there any evidence that consumers are rushing out to buy Creative Suite 5.5 because it is their last chance to just own the software without owning the license? Because a lot of their users are these kinds of professionals who don't want to be on the hook to pay every month.
Well, I think there is a subsection of the marketplace when we look at that called pro-consumer market, which represents probably about 30% of Adobe's revenues. Those are the customers who would be most likely to run out and buy it up front versus trying to buy it, buy the drink or per month, as you mentioned. Realistically, though, I think subscription services is the future of software. I think the strategy that Adobe's taking here is the right strategy to move towards that. I think they will get more incremental new customers. Just in Wall Street's eyes, trying to predict that revenue stream makes it really difficult for us to predict revenues as well as the company.
Robert, how do you see this spat between Adobe and Apple playing out? Do you think it's going to be resolved, or do you think they're just going to keep butting heads?
Well, I think it'll ultimately get resolved, and the question is when. Is it more likely in CS6, or is it more likely in, as it relates to the Creative Suite products? And ultimately, what happens with the market share gains that Android's able to make and the HTML5 standard. So I do think they'll ultimately get it resolved. It's probably more likely, 12 to 18 months away, though.
All right, 12 to 18 months. That's a long way out. Our thanks to Robert Breza of RBC Capital.